Welcome to the Grid Mod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome back to the Grid Mod Pod. Today we are going to have a discussion around the AEIC Achievement Awards of 2025. And the idea behind the Achievement Awards is really to give another opportunity to our utility members and the innovative and creative thinkers that are within the walls, a space to really share the great work that's happening. So today we have Ryan Hawthorne, who I will allow him to introduce himself. So thank you for coming on and really educating about the project that you guys submitted this year. And we'll kind of get into the details of that project, really how it came to be, what the successes have been, and really lessons learned for, the next big journey that you're all embarking upon. So with that, Ryan, welcome.
Thanks, Liz, for having me. Appreciate, always a great opportunity to talk about the good things that we're doing at Central Hudson Gas and Electric. So, as you said, my name is Ryan Hawthorne. I serve as Central Hudson's Vice President of Engineering.
So the title of the project that we're going to talk about is Crew on Site, which is, one would say, an enhancement to a much larger initiative and probably completion of the Advanced Distribution Management System that Central Hudson has developed over time. So, just tell us a little bit about what was the problem that you were trying to solve with this particular project and why did it matter relative to everything that's happening in this space?
Sure, and it's like any deployment of an advanced distribution management system, it's a journey. So this has been one that's been really years in culmination for us at Central Hudson. The crux for us is how do we deploy kind of the advanced features of a distribution management system. So kind of as you're creating that intelligent grid that allows you to increase your ability to automate switching on your system, improve the efficiencies of your system. How do you deploy those advanced capabilities while maintaining safety in mind and making sure that if the crews that you have out on the front lines are in a spot where they are not in a compromised position and they have that trust behind what you're deploying? That was really key for us in this process.
Right. And just for some of our listeners, and I think it's just a good opportunity on this podcast to educate and inform. And, I've had the privilege to teach a course this fall in regards to really energy transport and storage to a set of master students. And, you come to realize, especially in the industry, that, people don't know what they don't know. And then they also assume a large amount of expectations of entities that they trust or rely on. And so what you just stated, we've been on a journey probably for 10 to 15 years on understanding the incredible value of building a distribution management system. And I think a lot of people maybe take in stride that, the transmission grid has always had, since really the 70s and 80s when it started networking itself to each other, and we had lots of stakeholders responsible to the overall performance. The distribution grid, in the way that it was designed, one-way power flow, understood the fundamentals of the core assets. So you didn't have to have this full situational awareness of your distribution grid down to the edge. So, where you evolved was taking that knowledge and built out ADMS, and then an enhancement, which is this crew on site, is having the awareness of individuals working on assets that provide, as you said, an enhancement of safety. And maybe you guys say this too, but I think if you speak to a lot of leaders in the industry, the utility's responsibility, electric utility, is safe, reliable, and affordable. And within those terms is a great deal of effort and capabilities. So this in itself kind of fits all three of those.
Yeah, I think so, and I think you struck it well. It's just, in 2025, Central Hudson's it's our 125th anniversary, and essentially, to your point, for that 125 years, we've really been operating the distribution system pretty much the same way throughout that time, up until really these last few years is where you've really seen that kind of changeover in just kind of the demands on the distribution grid and just how we are fundamentally changing what we expect of it. So between distributed generation looking to interconnect and kind of causing that two-way power flow to really trying to amp up the automation to really, reduce or eliminate outages on our system. So that was really kind of the crux for us as we moved here. And it was a fundamental shift for us because we've been operating that same way for 100 plus years. Our frontline workers have an expectation of this is how the work gets done. You introduce something like an advanced distribution management system, and for us, it's also a control process. So, where we've operated in the past was that authority to, open that switch, close this switch was always done locally within the regions that our frontline workers work. So, all right, I don't necessarily have to call somebody and say, this is what I'm going to do. So you add that on top of now, we're also then going to add some automation and capabilities with a central system that creates a whole lot of questions around who do I trust on the other side of this screen or the other side of this phone, and do they have my safety in mind? So that was really rooted into how do we deploy this effectively and really manage the change throughout our organization. This isn't just a technology project. This is an organizational wide project. How do we get them to the table, speak to, this is where we feel we need to make sure that we are flawless on, and this is how we're going to protect you, but really also kind of get them to the process to say, what else can we do in here to advance our capabilities.
So, to our longtime listeners, I did not plant Ryan to say anything about people and processes, but I think one of my goals and continuous goals of educating and creating a space for the peers to educate the peers is, the technology is rapidly evolving and accessible in many ways. Now, there's complexities to that of like, developing your financial models to determine, the value and the worth and be able to quantify. But then a big component of once that's agreed upon, there is multiple groups within the utility that have to be unlocked and or brought to an awareness that we're going to do this project. And in doing so, it's going to create a ripple of change. So you kind of spoke to that, here you have your ADMS. I'm assuming it was like in flight or was up and running, and then it was like, what? Was there like a series of like an awareness of like it would be really beneficial if, and that's kind of how the enhancement rolled out, or was this kind of a part of the roadmap from the beginning? I guess from conceptually like how this
I think
evolved.
I think it's kind of a mix of both. If we went at the start of this, I don't know if we would have recognized that, hey, that there's a gap here. But as we went through that deployment process, and before we kind of pulled the trigger on saying, all right, now our authority is centralized with our operators, and now they have that control. That was a key component of this, making sure we've got the right protections in place and we've got that rollout and knowledge, awareness, and abilities within our field frontline workers to say, all right, I understand the new process now. This is how I safeguard myself. This is how the system safeguards me. Those were definitely key processes within our deployment. This has been a multi-year deployment for us. We've been on the grid modernization front for, to your point, it feels like the better part of a decade. But really, the last couple of years have been where the rubber has really hit the road. There's a lot of back end work and building out your automation and on your distribution lines, building in the communications to them, building up your GIS model to make sure everything kind of ties together. We've had really a core group from engineering, operations, technology, working hand in hand for some time, kind of pulling all these pieces together. And as we were kind of reaching that finish line, it's all right for us to really deploy those advanced applications like Fizzer, fault isolation, and service restoration. What are the protections in place? And that was where we started asking those questions as to what can the system do? Is there a gap in that? And how do we solve that gap?
Which I love. So like for our listeners that are trying to understand and learn, I think another powerful unawareness is, when we say power grid, very easily, when I say we, like maybe like the large publications and journals and documentation that we're all creating to like try to tell the story, the power grid we must realize, has four large components that must know each other. However, we've gotten to a space where they're all seen as one. but you have your bulk generation, your transmission, your distribution, and then the edge. And so the grid modernization space, has evolved really from the idea of enhancing the intelligence, or dare I say, a smart grid, which ultimately was, we now have devices that we can communicate and send a signal to take action, which is the automation that you're speaking of. So it really wasn't until the really late 90s, early 2000s that a lot of utilities started to realize that this technology was available to the distribution grid, where you can hang these switches, right? Reclosers, sectionalizers, etc., that the control center can communicate to the switches to take action when it senses some type of fault. So I guess I'm just trying to ground some of the things that you said, because it's powerful, is like, the grid was maintained and operated by individuals making phone calls. So back on the original way transmission was operated, the control center, does a, switching procedure, which you can clarify me on language, which is a whole series of steps that is constructed, reviewed, approved, and then like the system's tagged out, calls are made to ensure that clearances are made. And then the situation of the workers can do the work in a safe space. And so as this DMS, and then ultimately advanced DMS, has been rolled out, there has always probably been a question in the back of many people's minds, is like, how do we ensure that the systems are all doing what that manual process has always been? And so this crew tag, project is really to, and I guess explain that a little bit, for like, so you have a platform that now is running a distribution management system. So it's pulling in data from all of these intelligent devices that Central Hudson has over the years put in place. And so the control room can kind of see that visibility. And now this additional enhancement is adding like location and then awareness. Is that like, kind of break that down a little bit for
Sure.
our
Yeah.
listeners?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on it in terms of kind of that automation journey. So we were in that same space of, we started deploying kind of those smart switches. We called them automatic load transfer schemes back in the mid 2000s. Really kind of standalone, kind of two-member teams around, yeah, essentially protecting a pocket of customers. So if there's a fault upstream, it's essentially kind of flopping it over and keeping their lights on while the problem upstream gets worked. We've deployed those through various kind of technology solutions over the years. When we were moving down the pathway of our distribution management system, it's all right, let's take that now and kind of put it on steroids. You no longer have these 2 or 3 member teams. You've got a variety of devices across your entire network that now, using a centralized system, can kind of allow them to work holistically together. So rather than this little pocket being protected by this local automation, it can then kind of take that back and say, where is our fault, and now can I do additional steps to really tie into other devices that were maybe standalone before, but then can holistically restore a greater part of your network. And that's really where the crew on site tag kind of comes into play, because you don't have that local automation of if this then that. Your options are kind of infinite into how things may get fed or alternated. And so for us, it was around, all right, what protections are there in place? And we kind of recognized, there isn't really that out of the box solution with our vendor to say, all right, this automatically gets disabled. So that's really where the crew on site tag kind of came into play. It was kind of a multifaceted approach. One is creating that procedure and cadence around crew reporting. So, all right, you're calling into our operators to say, this is where I am working today. I'm handling conductor at this location. That's critical for their protection, but also critical for awareness in the control room around kind of where our crews are working on a day-to-day basis. They take that information, tag it into our system, which then creates that visual right on the map as to where these crews are working, logs it into our system, and then most importantly, goes and disables the automated capabilities of those automation devices within the region they're working. So that way, should something go bad while they're working, either something they may have caused or something just adjacent to them, if they are then encountered into a situation where there's a fault at play, we're not re-energizing them accidentally. So that's really the crux of what this solution was: is if something goes bump, we're not then causing a re-energization of a situation that could be quite catastrophic, and causing an issue with our crews, while they've got their hands on conductor. That's the name of the game here.
So, thinking through, what outcomes or really impacts stood out to you once the project was implemented, maybe both expected and unexpected, just from
Yeah, and
the
I'd
lighting.
say it's even before it was implemented, and this really gets back to the change management conversation. We didn't come to our field crews and say, "All right, on day one, this is what we're doing," and kind of jump on board. Because this is such a transformation as to what we've been doing for some time, we spent a lot of time building up awareness around what is a distribution management system, why we're going down that pathway, really trying to make sure they understand and kind of come on the journey with us. And then coming up, quite frankly, and saying, look, you know, job one for us is making sure that we keep you safe. And this is what we're talking about doing. And let's kind of walk you through it. We actually kind of physically ran the paces with it too. Of look, we'll put you on site and we'll kind of put this in play, and we'll show you how, with these protections in place, it will not close back in on you, just to make sure that we can physically model and show like what we're talking about is there, and this is what it's actually going to do, to create that trust factor for us to say, all right, we are comfortable from an operations standpoint to essentially pull the trigger on moving to the centralized operation, and going. So we've got checks in place to make sure that those regular reports in are occurring, and we kind of metric that and just make sure if there's a kind of a slowdown, we keep track on that, just to make sure new processes they take a bit to become habit. So just kind of keeping people honest with that. But it really helped build the buy-in as we were deploying this. There's still work to be done. We are not deployed system wide, so this is really a portion of our network, which then creates just conversations around who you communicate with and how often you communicate with them with. There's the people that are living in it day to day, but then you've also got crews that may be coming from a adjoining service territory that maybe don't aren't used to that conversation. So we also need to provide them awareness, but also recognize their experiences are a little different. And then as we cut over their area, having those same kind of regimented processes in place.
I mean, this might be it seems a little boring, but I think it's fascinating. Like, so when you think what you've been talking a lot about is open communication, talking about it early, you know, creating an organization or a team or a culture that, the questions and the enhancements are really, dare I say, innovation, which is truly a process of creating and applying new or meaningfully improved ideas, right? Methods or technologies. So like it's a whole, cultural shift to like approach a crew and or supervisor and or an organization and be like, we are going to do this new idea. And like what you kind of said is like you didn't really wait till the conception and execution thereof. There was an enormous amount of lift in that open, clear communication of like, let's do this together. And would you say, and I think one thing we could do better in our industry is, for some reason the word innovation in our risk adverse cultures butt heads. But truly, I think we are one of the most innovative industries. It's just like, can we like rephrase that? But all I have to say, because what you really talked through was an innovative process, right? Like this is a new idea. It's meaningful. It's going to bring, value. There's going to be an implementation process. And at the end, you're going to measure and or, hold each other accountable in regards to the improvements that it brought, right?
Yeah,
So I like,
and quite frankly, we did recognize this as an innovation internally. We've seen that same struggle as to, and I completely agree with you. Particularly now in this space in the energy industry, it's one of the most impactful times. I always say that to new employees, new engineers that are starting, is to the decisions we make today are really going to shape what the next generation looks like because of just how much is changing so rapidly. And we see that same push pull within our organization of highlighting innovation versus I'm just doing my job. This is what I need to do. But we also need to take the time to recognize those things. It may be something that you think is core to your job, but if we're doing something a little bit different, or we're trying something knew that worked well in a different part of, in a different company. That's the beauty of the utility industry, is you can kind of steal from everybody, quite frankly, is who's doing it best, and then source that kind of solution internally.
I mean, we AIC's tagline, "The knowledge of one is the knowledge of all," and it's
Mhm.
truly was an industry that was created by collaborative thought. And I think, the more that we as individuals can understand the innovation of the day-to-day workers that are keeping the lights on 24/7, 365, and like, the firefighters, they are in the best position to be the innovative leaders, but we just have to give them the language and the like an awareness that we want those ideas. Like when we say we, like the culture, so that we can, do our due diligence and execute. I love it. So thinking that innovation or improvement or continuous improvement or operational excellence it doesn't really have a finish line, right? So you kind of alluded to, this is one of many enhancements that you guys are driving. So, what's next, or any ideas what you can talk about that you guys are actively working on to
Yeah, so we're
mature this work?
still, yeah, we're still working through the journey of our full deployment of our distribution management system. So
Okay.
the way our service territory is set up, we're essentially bisected by a river. So, like every other deployment of grid automation, it's kind of done in a territory by territory region. So, what we're doing today on the east side of the river is essentially leveraging this crew on site tag. As we complete kind of the modeling and the integration of our devices on the west side, we'll be likewise deploying it there. The next piece for us, following the reliability piece, is the efficiency side of it, and that's definitely an area where we're honing in on, something that we're looking a little different because we are not a vertically integrated utility. One of the key components for us from our grid modernization journey was driving that efficiency. So how can we essentially kind of flatten that load profile to, reduce kind of the demands on our system, but then kind of pass that kilowatt hour savings from the supply side, from the customer side of the bill. Most people that deploy that kind of Volt-Var optimization or conservation voltage reduction, most of those are vertically integrated utilities that are trying to peak shave, avoid that kind of couple-hour window where your system is so taxed. We're looking about doing that 24/7, and there are very few, based on what we've seen, that are doing that. Creates new challenges and new ways to, all right, test the system that maybe wasn't designed for that, and we continue to work through that. But again, that's a teamwork conversation. It's not just one group. It's our vendors, it's operations, it's engineering, it's technology, all trying to serve that common end goal of safe, reliable, and affordable service for our customers.
Right, what you alluded to is fully deploy the ADMS and
Mhm.
then get into the space of Volt-Var optimization and CVR, which is, as you stated, vertically integrated. There's a very easy penciling of cost benefit analysis based on the
Uh-huh.
peak shaving. But what we're learning, because we do share ideas, is there's value and qualitative and quantitative benefits to be able to have a full system VVO type approach. And, we could talk about that in another podcast episode. But, I think that's something that's evolving is we're realizing a lot of the use cases that were first proven out actually can roll into many other opportunities of efficiencies gains, either through efficiency of utilization of the commodity that we sell, and or efficiencies of where and when we roll trucks and how we maintain and operate the whole grid. And I think there is an awesome conversation that's coming out of a lot of the work that has been executed from the utilities on that mature state of like adopting ADMS is realizing that it's giving you full situational awareness to the assets that you already own and operate, and giving you that ability to manage those assets in a way that we've never been able to because of, the technology wasn't available. So it's kind of like snowballing in a positive direction. So I look forward to hearing, your journey as you continue to roll out those systems. So I guess my other question to you, being that you're immersed in the grid mod journey, which I think, another shout out to all of the utilities that are actively, championing these use cases and these capabilities, is like what key lessons would you share with your peers and or maybe external stakeholders who might consider, the relevancy or the challenge to roll out a similar project?
Yeah, We have by no means been perfect through our journey. I will be very upfront on that. You know, each utility brings their own kind of unique set of circumstances. Kind of what technologies they have in place today. You know, are they an AMI shop? Are they not? You know, what do you have for your modeling? What do you have for your automation? I think we've learned, what should we tackle first and what's most important. And we had to shift during that process. When we were moving down this pathway, it was all right, the business case is driven by VVO. Let's tackle VVO, and reliability is that side benefit. Well, VVO is the most complex thing to deploy in an ADMS. Maybe you should tackle that second. So we did have to kind of do a pivot through that process and
Yep.
kind of learn from our peers a little bit as to where they've struggled, where they've identified solutions. The community at large in the industry is a wealth of information on any of these things. Grid mod notwithstanding, that's just one example of an area where you can really learn from everybody. You may have a different software solution, but the challenges and the uniqueness is all the same. So we learned from our peers in the industry as to kind of where their stumbling blocks were. We found our own stumbling blocks, but we've really kind of now hit our groove and are really kind of running in that space to say, all right, like we can now execute, and here's what's up next.
Love it. So, to close, your project really highlights the essential thought, technology, which was what you were, integrating and implementing, will change systems, but the trust and the communication are really what accelerate like the adoption. So, you know, for this particular project, the safety aspect of it was a part of the rollout, right? Like the tag wasn't just the software feature, it was this message to the crews and all of the interaction in between that automation will not move forward without them, right? So there is a hesitation to adopt these because it changes and there feels like an unsafe, but you're creating a tool that helps kind of bridge that gap. So really building trust from the end users back into the control room was kind of a big takeaway that I heard from here. And
Yeah,
I think the other one,
absolutely.
change management. It is important of the technology itself.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, tying back to what is success for a deployment. A lot of people look at this as, oh, it's a software deployment. No, this is a wholesale change deployment, and what is the most important facets here, and what cannot fail during a cutover process. And quite frankly, safety needs to be top of mind. So that was
Right.
very clearly set in stone early on of for us to be able to say we're comfortable kind of pulling that trigger and cutting over. How are we protecting those that we work with on a day-to-day basis, and what are the safeguards in place, whether they be software, whether they be human, whether they be process. It's got to be that multi-layered approach. You can't lean on just one thing, because if that goes wrong, you're setting somebody up for a trap. So that was the change management was critical for us to be able to do this, and that was ingrained as to why we went down the pathway of crew on site tagging.
Love it. Okay, well, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate your sharing the journey, and I look forward to hearing more coming out of Central Hudson and being on this, transformational space with you all. So, thanks again.
Liz, thanks for having me.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.